My name is Blythe. I am 34 years old, and the message that finally broke my family apart reached me beside a self-service airline kiosk at the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The screen in front of me was blinking with a harsh red error notification. My reservation code did not exist. I typed the letters again, my fingers moving quickly over the glass, but the result was the same. The ticketing agent at the desk checked her system twice, frowned, and told me that my boarding pass to Santa Barbara had been canceled online exactly 25 minutes earlier. By the person who booked it. My father, Gideon, had dropped me off at the farthest passenger loading zone, smiling and waving as if nothing in the world was wrong. I stood there as the bustling noise of travelers rolling their luggage faded into a dull ring in my ears. I pulled out my phone and called my parents. No answer. I called my younger sister, Mallory. It went straight to voicemail. I called my other sister, Delaney. Nothing. Then, the screen lit up with a single text message from my father. It read, "I deleted your boarding pass. Beg me, and I might consider rebooking it. Or just walk home." I stared at those words. Beg me. It was not a joke. It was a calculated, deliberate punishment meant to break my spirit and humiliate me in a public place. He wanted me stranded. He wanted me panicked. He wanted me to realize that without him, I was nothing, and that I needed his permission to be part of the family. The betrayal felt like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest, a cold realization that the people I had supported for years viewed me as nothing more than a disobedient dog needing a leash. Before I tell you exactly why this cruel message sent 4 entitled people racing back to the terminal in utter panic, let me know where you are watching this story from today and what the weather is like in your city. I want to see just how far this family drama travels. I did not cry. I did not panic. I looked at his message, let out a short, hollow laugh that startled the woman standing next to me, and I typed 3 words in reply. Are you sure? 5 minutes later, the family SUV was speeding back toward the airport curb. I knew they were panicking. I knew my father was frantically searching the crowds, sweating behind the steering wheel, realizing he had miscalculated. But by the time their tires screeched to a halt outside the departure doors, I was already sitting in the back of a ride-share vehicle, watching the terminal blur past my window as we merged onto the highway. They were too late. And they had no idea just how much their little power trip was about to cost them. To understand why my father decided to abandon me at an airport, you have to understand the dynamic we had been trapped in for years. I work as a senior marine logistics loss adjuster. It is a demanding, high-pressure career that requires me to work 60 hours a week, analyzing risks, dissecting contracts, and preventing expensive disasters. Because of my work ethic, I earn a 6-figure salary. I live quietly. I drive a reliable car, I cook at home, and I save my money. My family, on the other hand, treated my financial stability as their own personal emergency fund. To them, my success was a shared utility, a tap they could turn on whenever they mismanaged their own lives. My father owned a small outdoor advertising and structural sign installation business. He always portrayed himself as a self-made patriarch, a proud businessman who provided for his flock. The reality was much darker. His company was constantly bleeding cash due to his poor management and inflated ego. My mother, Corinne, worked as a scheduling receptionist at a private eye clinic. She enabled him at every turn, playing the helpless victim to manipulate everyone around her. She thrived on guilt trips and expected me to cater to her emotional needs, demanding a twisted kind of loyalty where my sole purpose was to make her feel like a successful mother without her putting in any actual effort. Then there were the golden children. My youngest sister, Mallory, was 24 and enrolled in a respiratory therapy certification program. She was lazy, entitled, and treated my financial help as her birthright. Delaney, my 27-year-old sister, was unemployed and dreaming of starting a mobile outdoor bicycle repair service, waiting around for someone else to fund her fantasy. And that someone was always expected to be me. The inciting incident, the spark that lit the fuse for this airport betrayal, happened 2 weeks prior. My father had cornered me in his office, sliding a stack of banking documents across his desk. He wanted to expand his business. He wanted a new fleet of vehicles and heavy machinery, and he needed a $120,000 loan with an exorbitant interest rate. The bank had looked at his chaotic ledgers and laughed. The only way he could secure the money was if I co-signed as the primary guarantor. I am a risk adjuster. I look at numbers for a living. I reviewed his terms, saw the inevitable default that would ruin my credit and drag me into bankruptcy, and I told him no. I explained the math. I explained the liability. But Gideon did not care about math. He cared about my defiance. He hated being outsmarted by his own daughter, and he hated that my money was out of his control. He decided right then and there that my arrogance needed to be corrected. This trip to California was supposed to be a grand celebration for my mother's 60th birthday. We were supposed to spend a week in a beautiful coastal town, drinking wine and pretending to be a perfect, happy family. Instead, it became the stage for my father's twisted revenge. He thought that stranding me, forcing me to grovel and beg for a seat on the plane, would remind me of my place. He wanted to shatter my independence. But he forgot one very crucial detail about this vacation. Sitting in the back of the quiet car as rain began to streak across the window, I did not feel the sudden sting of heartbreak. I felt a cold, deep clarity. The text message glowing on my screen was not an isolated incident of a father losing his temper. It was the crowning exhibit in a museum of pain and financial abuse I had been trapped in for 4 years. My mind began to catalog everything, shifting seamlessly into the analytical mode I used for my job. If I was going to cut the cord, I needed to review the ledgers of my own life. Let us take a walk through that museum. Exhibit A was Mallory's tuition. For the past 2 years, I had been quietly logging into her university portal and paying $4,800 every single semester so she could stay in her respiratory therapy program. She never thanked me. She never acknowledged the hours I worked to earn that money. It was simply an invisible transaction she expected to happen, like the sun rising in the morning. Exhibit B was the rusted backbone of my father's struggling company. A heavy-duty installation truck that he could not afford. When the bank threatened to repossess it, I stepped in. I set up an automatic transfer from my checking account for $850 every single month. I paid for the vehicle that kept his business breathing, while he walked around town boasting about his entrepreneurial success to his friends. Exhibit C was the roof over my parents' heads. 2 years ago, they mismanaged their income so badly that they fell behind on their property taxes to Pierce County. The warning letters arrived, threatening liens and foreclosure. I stepped in again. I spent hours on the phone with the county clerks, negotiating an installment plan, and then I paid the first $7,200 out of my own savings to keep them from losing their home. Exhibit D was Delaney's fantasy business. She wanted to be a mobile mechanic, fixing expensive mountain bikes on the trails. She had the vision, but zero capital and zero drive to save for it. I had placed a refundable deposit of $3,500 on a compact service van and a specialized set of tools to secure them while she supposedly looked for a part-time job to pay the rest. She never looked for the job. She just waited for me to finalize the purchase. All of these contributions, all of these silent rescues, were never enough. They were black holes, consuming my resources while my family criticized me for being too career-focused, too distant, too cold. My father's attempt to break me at the airport was not just about the loan. It was his deep-seated insecurity. He hated that his survival depended on the daughter he always treated as an afterthought. He wanted the money without the humiliation of asking, so he tried to establish dominance through fear. My phone buzzed in my hand, pulling me back to the present. The screen showed my mother's name. I silenced it. Then it was my father. I silenced it again. 14 missed calls in the span of 10 minutes. The panic was setting in on their end. I opened my travel application. The reservation for the oceanfront vacation home in Carmel, a stunning property that cost $6,400 for the week, was sitting right there. It was booked under my account, paid for entirely by my credit card. My father had only purchased the airline tickets so he could control the seating arrangements, a minor expense compared to the lodging. I tapped the screen. The cancellation policy stated I could receive a full refund if canceled within the next 2 hours. I hit the button. A green check mark appeared. The house was gone. Next, I opened the rental car application. The luxury 7-passenger SUV that was supposed to fit everyone and their luggage comfortably at the destination was also under my name. I hit cancel. Another green checkmark. Gone. I then navigated to the tour operator website. I had prepaid for a private coastal vineyard tour and a sunset sailing excursion for my mother's birthday. I requested a full refund back to my card. Done. I did not touch their flight tickets. I did not take any money out of their personal bank accounts. I simply reclaimed my own property. I erased every single comfort and luxury that I had personally funded for this trip. My phone vibrated with an incoming call from my Aunt Vera. Vera was my mother's younger sister, but they were nothing alike. Vera was a tax accountant, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had always seen through my father's facade. She was the only person in the extended family who ever checked on me just to see how I was doing, not to ask for a favor. I answered on the first ring. Did Gideon actually do it? Vera asked, her voice tight with anger. Did he cancel your flight because you refused to back his ridiculous business loan? I let out a long breath. Yes. He told me to beg him or walk home. Vera swore loudly through the speaker. He planned this, Blythe. He was bragging about it at the Sunday family dinner 2 days ago when you were working. He told your mother and your sisters that you were getting too arrogant, that you needed to remember who the patriarch of the family was. He said leaving you at the terminal would induce a panic attack, and you would be so desperate to rejoin the group that you would agree to anything by the time you bought a replacement ticket and met them there. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. My mother knew. My sisters knew. They all sat there and listened to a grown man plot to strand a woman at an airport as a psychological torture tactic, and they went along with it. They probably laughed. They probably packed their bags, dreaming of the oceanfront mansion I paid for, fully expecting me to crawl back to them holding a checkbook. They thought my fear of being unloved was greater than my sense of self-respect. Thank you, Aunt Vera, I said softly. I just canceled the house. I canceled the cars. I canceled the tours. Good, Vera said fiercely. Do not give them another dime. I hung up the phone and looked out the window. The skyline of Seattle was disappearing in the rearview mirror. I opened my banking application. It was time to close the museum for good. The tuition transfer scheduled for Mallory next month? Cancelled. The automatic draft for Gideon's work truck? Deleted. The property tax installments? Stopped. I initiated the refund request for Delaney's service van deposit. I took nothing from them. I just stopped giving. As my ride share merged onto the interstate heading back toward my quiet, empty apartment, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. My father wanted me to walk home. I was going home. But I was making sure they would have nowhere to sleep when they landed. The silence in the back of the cab was the most beautiful sound I had heard in months. The driver, a quiet older man who had sensed my tense energy, kept the radio turned down and his eyes on the road. I sat in the soft leather seat, watching the notifications pile up on my lock screen like desperate, digital screams. Another voicemail from Gideon. Another text from Corinne. Another missed call from Mallory. They were boarding the plane. I knew the departure schedule by heart. They were likely standing in the jet bridge, realizing that I was not rushing through the terminal in tears to beg for my boarding pass. My father had played his trump card, expecting me to fold. Instead, I had flipped the entire table. I decided to listen to Gideon's voicemail. I pressed the phone to my ear, watching the raindrops race each other across the glass. Blythe, where are you? His voice lacked the arrogant venom of his text message. It was strained, breathless, layered with the chaotic background noise of the boarding area. This was just a lesson. You always act like paying for something means you own us. It was a joke to bring you down to earth. Call the rental agency and restore the house. They are saying the reservation is gone. We can talk about respect when you get here. Do not ruin your mother's birthday over a misunderstanding. I lowered the phone. A misunderstanding. He strands me at the airport, tells me to beg, and when his free luxury vacation disappears, suddenly it is a joke I am failing to understand. A text from Corinne arrived a moment later. It did not ask if I had a safe ride home. It did not ask how I felt. It read, "You are being incredibly selfish. Your father made a bad joke, but you are punishing the whole family. Fix the lodging right now before we take off. We have nowhere to stay." I stared at the words. She knew about the plan 2 days ago. She wanted me to be humiliated just as much as he did. She wanted to see me broken and dependent, so she could swoop in and play the magnanimous, forgiving mother. I typed a single word in reply. No. I turned off my phone, slid it into my purse, and leaned my head back against the seat. Let them fly. Let them soar through the clouds sipping ginger ale, knowing that gravity was waiting for them in California. They boarded anyway. My father, in his infinite arrogance, likely believed he could simply fix the situation upon landing. He probably told my mother not to worry, claiming he would use his own credit card to book a hotel room, assuming there would be plenty of affordable vacancies in a premium coastal town during peak tourist season. He was a man who lived on assumptions, primarily the assumption that someone else would always cover the gap between his ego and his reality. When I arrived at my apartment, I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and breathed in the scent of cedar and clean linen. It was quiet. It was safe. I made myself a cup of tea, sat at my dining table, and opened my laptop. I am a risk adjuster. Documentation is my religion. I created a new digital folder on my desktop. I saved the screenshot of the canceled flight notification. I saved the screenshot of Gideon's text message demanding I beg him. I exported the banking ledgers showing my payments for the rental house, the cars, the tuition, the taxes, the truck. I organized them chronologically, building a fortress of undeniable facts. If my family wanted a war, they were going to find themselves fighting against a wall of receipts. I forwarded copies of everything to Aunt Vera, knowing she would keep them safe. Then I closed the laptop, walked into my living room, and curled up on the sofa with a book. For the first time in 4 years, I was not worried about Gideon's business failing. I was not worried about Mallory failing her exams. I was not worried about Delaney complaining about her lack of opportunities. The emotional parasite that had been draining my energy was severed. I spent the weekend resting. I went for long walks in the city, ordered expensive takeout, and slept for 9 hours straight. I did not turn my phone back on until Sunday evening. When the screen illuminated, it was like opening the door to a hurricane. Dozens of messages, missed calls, and furious voicemails flooded in. I went straight to the airline application and checked their return flight status. Arrived. They were back in Seattle. The timeline of their weekend disaster slowly pieced itself together through the angry texts they had sent. When they landed in San Jose, the reality of my cancellations hit them like a brick wall. Carmel lodging on short notice was nearly impossible to find, and what was available cost 4 times what I had paid months earlier. Gideon's credit cards did not have the limit to absorb a sudden $4,000 hotel charge. The rental car counters at the airport laughed at him when he asked for a 7-passenger SUV without a reservation. They ended up crammed into a single room at a dingy, budget motel near the airport highway. They spent my mother's 60th birthday eating fast food, arguing relentlessly, and blaming me for their misery. The glorious coastal vineyard tour was replaced by the roar of commercial jets taking off over their cheap motel roof. They lasted 1 night before Gideon surrendered, paid exorbitant fees to change their flights, and dragged everyone back to Washington the very next morning. I read a message Gideon had sent to the extended family group chat on Saturday night. It read, "Blythe had a massive emotional breakdown at the airport over a minor ticketing glitch and vindicatively canceled Corinne's entire birthday trip. Please give Corinne some grace. She is heartbroken by her daughter's cruelty." A minor ticketing glitch. He was already spinning the narrative, painting himself as the victim of an unstable daughter. I did not reply to the group chat. I did not defend myself. I knew that reacting in anger was exactly what he wanted. He wanted a screaming match. He wanted a messy, emotional fight where he could twist my words and use my frustration as proof of my instability. I closed the chat application and set the phone down. They were home with their luggage and their rage, stewing in their ruined weekend. But the vacation was just the appetizer. They had absolutely no idea that the main course was about to be served, and it was going to taste like financial ruin. 3 days after they returned to Seattle in disgrace, the first real domino fell. It was Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my desk in the corporate office, reviewing a maritime salvage claim, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mallory. She sent a screenshot of her university's student portal. The screen was plastered with a glaring red banner indicating that her final tuition installment for the respiratory therapy program was past due and a late fee had been applied. "You must have entered the wrong date," she wrote. There was no greeting. No apology for the airport. Just an entitled demand. "Can you fix it today? Registration for clinicals closes on Friday, and if my balance is not zero, I get dropped from the program. Fix it now." I picked up my phone and typed my response slowly, ensuring every word was deliberate. I did not enter the wrong date. I ended all voluntary family payments. Less than 30 seconds later, my phone rang. Mallory's name flashed on the screen. I stepped out of my office, walked down the quiet, carpeted hallway to an empty conference room, and answered. "What do you mean you ended the payments?" Her voice was shrill, echoing with disbelief. "Are you insane? You know I need this paid by Friday." "You should contact the financial aid office," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "Blythe, stop throwing a tantrum over a stupid flight. I did not cancel your ticket. Dad did." "Why are you punishing me?" "I know Dad did," I said. "My question is why you packed your bags and boarded a flight for a luxury vacation after listening to him plan my humiliation 2 days in advance. Why did you accept a trip knowing I had been deliberately excluded?" Silence hung on the line. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. She could not deny it. She knew I had spoken to Aunt Vera. "He told us it would be good for you," Mallory finally muttered, her voice losing its aggressive edge, shifting into a pathetic whine. "He said you needed to be humbled." I felt uncomfortable, Blythe, I really did. But I already requested time off from my clinical training. I needed your tuition payment to finish the semester. If I defended you, he would have screamed at me. I just stayed quiet. "You knew I was stranded on purpose," I said, the anger rising in my chest, but remaining tightly controlled. "You watched him send me a message telling me to beg like a dog. And you expected me to keep paying for your life anyway. I thought you would cool down." Mallory cried. "Dad promised all of us that you always forgive the family eventually. He said you would buy another ticket and meet us there." "Blythe, please, delaying my graduation will ruin my future." I looked out the conference room window at the gray Seattle sky. "I told you to contact the financial aid office. Ask them about federal student loans, emergency grants, hospital sponsorships, or a payment plan. It is your education. It remains your responsibility. You promised to help me," she yelled, the tears finally breaking through. "Family promises should count without paperwork. You're acting like a monster." "Promises also depend on honest conduct," I replied. "You knowingly took my labor for granted while participating in a scheme to hurt me. I am not a monster. I am simply a bank that has permanently closed your account." I hung up the phone before she could scream again. 2 hours later, Delaney called. I was eating lunch at my desk when her number appeared. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "The supplier just called me," Delaney said. Her voice was shaking with rage. "He said the reservation for the bicycle tools and the service van is going to expire at 5 o'clock today unless I bring him a cashier's check for the remaining balance. He said the deposit was refunded to your card. Put the deposit back, Blythe. Right now." "You promised to help me launch this business," she demanded, not waiting for my answer. "I promised to help you before you stood in the terminal and laughed in the background of Dad's voicemail while I was standing outside in the rain," I replied. Delaney stopped speaking. The denial died in her throat. She knew I had heard her giggling on the audio recording. "Gideon had left me. That deposit was my money," I continued. "The agreement we had was informal, and you have not invested a single dollar of your own capital or found a job to support your own dream. Dad planned it. Delaney shouted, trying to deflect the blame. He told us to laugh. He said if we did not go along with it, he would kick me out of the house. You are destroying my life because you are mad at him. I am not destroying anything, I said calmly. I am just no longer building it for you. I ended the call. I knew what was happening. The Golden children were panicking because the invisible safety net they had bounced on for years had suddenly vanished, and they were hitting the concrete floor of reality. Later that afternoon, the biggest domino of all began to sway. The commercial lender for Gideon's box truck contacted his company. The automatic draft for $850 had failed. The lender, knowing Gideon's precarious financial history, did not offer a grace period. My father called me directly from the commercial dealership. He bypassed all pleasantries. We have 3 installation jobs scheduled for tomorrow. He barked into the phone, the panic barely masked by his aggressive tone. If they take this truck, I lose the contracts. I lose the clients. Turn the transfer back on, Blythe. The truck belongs to Callaway Signs and Structures, I replied, leaning back in my office chair. It never belonged to me. You benefited from this family. He roared, drawing the attention of whoever was standing near him at the dealership. Successful children help their parents. You are supposed to respect the people who raised you. Why did a successful daughter deserve to be abandoned at an airport and told to walk home? I asked quietly. He hesitated. He tried to pivot. You are changing the subject. That was a joke that got out of hand. You cannot cripple my business over hurt feelings. I demand you pay for 1 more month so I can sort this out. I refused. I did not raise my voice. I simply said no, and I disconnected the call. By Tuesday evening, the family was in a state of absolute chaos. Corinne called Aunt Vera, sobbing hysterically, begging Vera to intervene and make me reasonable. Vera, bless her heart, did not yield an inch. She told me later that my mother had described the airport incident as a harmless prank, a bad attempt at humor that I was twisting into financial abuse. Gideon created this problem, Vera had told my mother. Blythe is not stealing your money. She is simply stopping her gifts. If your family collapses because one person stops writing checks, maybe you should look at how you are living. The warning shots had been fired. They knew I was serious, but their entitlement was too deep. They still believed they could force me to submit if they applied enough pressure. And so, they began plotting a public ambush. By Wednesday, the shock had morphed into a coordinated campaign of harassment. The extended family, riled up by Gideon's twisted narrative, began crawling out of the woodwork. My phone became a battlefield of unsolicited opinions and aggressive demands. Uncle Bram texted me at 6 in the morning. Family disagreements should not interfere with education. Pay your sister's tuition. Be the bigger person. Cousin Leona messaged me on social media. I heard you exploded over a missed flight and ruined Aunt Corinne's milestone birthday without warning. That is sick, Blythe. You need therapy. Aunt Muriel, one of Corinne's closest confidants, called and left a weeping voicemail claiming I was breaking my mother's heart and destroying her health. They were flying monkeys circling me, carrying the poison my father had fed them. Vera sent me screenshots from a massive family group chat that I was conveniently excluded from. Gideon had written a long, dramatic paragraph claiming I was suffering from a severe emotional breakdown, that the pressure of my corporate job had made me delusional, and I was now using money to control and abuse my own parents. Corinne added crying emojis, stating she feared I was losing my mind. Delaney claimed I was a jealous spinster sabotaging her independent future. Mallory played the victim, crying that her nursing career was dead because I was holding her hostage over a ticketing mistake. They were building a consensus. They were trying to isolate me socially, turning the entire tribe against me so that the pressure to conform and apologize would become unbearable. They wanted me to feel so alienated and ashamed that I would open my wallet just to buy back their fake affection. I did not send furious replies. I did not engage in the group chat debates. I knew that arguing with flying monkeys only feeds the drama. Instead, I took a blank sheet of paper and wrote down a timeline of every single payment, every canceled service, and every text message. I attached the airline evidence and my banking receipts. I kept it private, waiting for the right moment. On Friday morning, Gideon made his move. He sent a formal message to my email, copying Corinne, Mallory, and Delaney. It read, "This silent treatment is childish. We are a family, and families face their problems together. I have reserved a private dining room at the Pelican Grill on the waterfront in Tacoma for Sunday evening at 6 o'clock. We are going to settle this matter once and for all. Everyone is bringing their relevant bills and financial statements so we can make a responsible, adult plan to move forward. Attendance is not optional." I read the email twice. A responsible, adult plan. It was almost laughable. He was not inviting me to a reconciliation dinner. He was summoning me to an ambush. He wanted to surround me, present 4 financial emergencies simultaneously, and use the sheer weight of their collective panic to make my refusal look monstrous. I replied with one sentence. "I will attend under one condition. Aunt Vera will be there with me." Gideon did not reply for nearly 2 hours. I could imagine the frantic arguments happening in his house. He knew Vera was immune to his manipulation, but he also knew that if he refused her presence, I would not show up. Finally, a one-word reply appeared in my inbox. "Fine." I spent the weekend preparing. I did not pack a dress or a gift. I packed a thick, black leather folder. Inside, I placed printed copies of the ledger I had maintained for 4 years. I printed the bank statements highlighting the tuition payments, the truck transfers, the county tax installments, and the equipment deposits. I printed the screenshot of Gideon's text message. I printed the receipts for the California vacation house and the luxury SUV. I was not going to a dinner party. I was going to a deposition. Sunday evening arrived with a cold breeze blowing off the Puget Sound. Vera picked me up in her sedan. She looked at the black folder in my lap and gave me a grim, approving nod. "Are you ready for the circus?" she asked, merging onto the highway toward Tacoma. "I am ready to burn the tent down," I replied. When we walked into the Pelican Grill, the hostess directed us to a private room at the back, overlooking the dark water. Gideon, Corinne, Mallory, and Delaney were already seated around a large circular table. The atmosphere was thick with tension. No one smiled. No one offered a greeting. The center of the table was scattered with papers. Mallory had her university billing statements. Delaney had printouts of her supplier estimates and photos of the bicycle service van. Gideon had the commercial truck repossession warning and the Pierce County property tax schedule. They looked like a board of directors preparing to reprimand an embezzling employee. "Let us agree that the airport lesson went too far," Gideon began, taking the head of the table. His voice was patronizing, the tone of a magnanimous ruler offering clemency. "Nobody expected you to react this dramatically, Blythe." "A lesson," I repeated softly, pulling out my chair but not sitting down. Vera stood silently behind me, her arms crossed. "It was a harmless lesson about respect," Gideon insisted, waving his hand dismissively. "But you embarrassed this family by canceling your mother's birthday arrangements." Corinne spoke next, dabbing her dry eyes with a napkin. She detailed the lost rental house, the miserable airport hotel in San Jose, the terrible fast food they had to eat, and the humiliating flight back. She painted a picture of absolute misery. She never once mentioned me standing alone at the airline kiosk in Seattle. Mallory slid her tuition printout toward me across the polished wood. "My graduation is going to be delayed," she said, her voice shaking with practiced victimhood. Delaney tapped her photos of the van. "I already contacted the weekend outdoor markets to secure a vendor spot. You have to honor your original commitment, Blythe." Gideon pushed the truck notice and the tax schedule into the center. "We need a plan." I looked at the 4 of them. Not a single person asked how I felt. Not a single person asked what I needed to heal the relationship. Not a single person offered a genuine apology for leaving me stranded. All they saw was a broken ATM machine, and they were furiously pressing buttons trying to get the cash to dispense again. I unzipped the black leather folder. The sound of the zipper opening seemed to suck the air out of the room. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and placed it on the table. I did not look at the bills they had presented. I looked directly into my father's eyes. I opened the text thread and read his message aloud, my voice carrying clearly over the soft background music of the restaurant. I deleted your boarding pass. Beg me, and I might consider rebooking it. Or just walk home. Gideon's jaw tightened. He shifted in his seat. Words spoken in anger should not determine a family's future. He deflected quickly, looking around the table for support. When exactly did you become angry? I asked, leaning forward slightly. You canceled the ticket 25 minutes before you dropped me off. You chose the farthest entrance so you could drive away before I ever reached the kiosk. That was not a sudden burst of anger. That was premeditated planning. Vera stepped forward, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. He told me about the plan 2 days before the trip, Gideon. You sat in my living room and bragged about it. Gideon's face flushed a deep, ugly red. I was just venting. He shouted, slamming his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. You intended to exclude me from the flight because I refused to guarantee your ruinous business loan, I said, my voice rising over his. You believed a few hours of panic would remind me that family acceptance mattered more than my financial caution. You expected me to cry, buy another ticket, arrive in California later that day, and continue paying for the luxury vacation I had already funded. Corinne looked down at her hands. I saw the guilt flash across her face. You knew, Mom, I said, turning my gaze to her. You knew there would be a lesson. You believed I would just purchase another seat and meet you there. You knew I had already paid for the house and the cars. She did not answer. She just kept staring at her napkin. Mallory sniffled. Dad promised us you would cool off before we landed. We did not think you would actually cancel everything. You did not expect me to be unaffected, I corrected her. You expected me to be hurt temporarily and useful permanently. I reached into the folder and pulled out the thick stack of printed ledgers. I laid them on top of Gideon's unpaid bills. This ledger is not an invoice, I explained, looking at all of them. I am not asking anyone to repay these gifts. I am not attaching interest to the kindness I showed you. This document exists because Dad has been telling the relatives that he carries this family, while claiming I only contribute when it suits my ego. I tapped the paper. The dates show something entirely different. For 4 years, my income has covered your predictable expenses, your emergency gaps, and your business plans. Plans that benefited everyone at this table except me. The airport incident did not erase those gifts, but it destroyed the assumption behind them. I watched Gideon's eyes scan the numbers. The $68,000 in total contributions stared back at him. I want everyone at this table to see that my decision was not sudden, I continued. It was not a tantrum over one delayed vacation. It was a direct response to a pattern of abuse. You admitted you planned to hurt me to force my compliance. Gideon recovered his bravado first. He shoved the ledger away. So, you have been keeping score against your own family like a sociopath. No, I said calmly. I started documenting when you started lying to the relatives about me. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You are using numbers to make me look weak in front of my own children. Keep this up, Blythe, and you will not be welcome at family gatherings. We will cut you out completely. I smiled. It was a cold, tired smile. You already used belonging as leverage at the airport. It does not carry power anymore. You cannot threaten to take away a family that I no longer want to be part of. I placed the final documents on the table. They were the cancellation confirmation receipts from my bank, proving that the automatic transfers were permanently terminated. The decisions are final, I stated, my voice echoing with finality. I will not resume the truck transfer. I will not pay the tuition. I will not fund the tax gifts or the business equipment. I will not negotiate under threats. I picked up my empty folder, turned around, and walked toward the door. Vera followed right behind me. Outside, the cold sea air hit my face, clearing the suffocating smell of the restaurant. We walked toward Vera's car, but before I could open the passenger door, I heard footsteps running across the asphalt. Mallory ran up behind us, clutching her tuition papers to her chest. Blythe, wait. She pleaded, her eyes wide with desperation. Please. Separate my tuition from everything else. My career should not be sacrificed for Dad's stupid mistake. I am innocent in this. You made your own decision, I said, looking at her without pity. You knew the plan. You laughed. And you boarded the plane. I reached into my purse, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and handed it to her. It contained the contact information for the college financial aid office, 3 local healthcare scholarships, a hospital tuition assistance program, and all the application deadlines. I had researched them the night before because, despite everything, I did not want her trapped without options. Mallory glanced at the page, her face twisting in disgust. These applications require essays. They require income verification forms and supervisor recommendations. Yes, I said. That is how the real world works. I do not have time for all that. She snapped, shoving the paper back at me. She did not want help becoming independent. She wanted my money because it required 0 effort, 0 accountability, and 0 gratitude. I let the paper fall to the wet pavement. Good luck, Mallory. I got into Vera's car and we drove away, leaving her standing under the dim glow of the parking lot streetlights. Later that night, as I was sitting in my living room trying to decompress, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from Delaney. Dad says if you do not reverse this by tomorrow morning, he is coming to your office. He thinks you will listen when your fancy corporate coworkers can see exactly what kind of ungrateful daughter you really are. I stared at the threat. Gideon was escalating. He thought professional embarrassment would force a surrender. I saved the message. I took a screenshot. I drafted an email to the head of building security at my corporate office, attaching the threat, photographs of Gideon and Corinne, and a formal request to bar them from the premises. The ambush at the restaurant had failed. The real war was about to begin on my turf, and I was going to make sure they regretted ever stepping foot in my building. Thank you for following the first part of the story. This family feud is just getting started. If you want to find out what security and legal measures Blythe used to counter her parents when they came to harass her at the company, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and leave a comment. See you in the next part. Tuesday morning arrived with the heavy gray skies typical of Seattle. I sat in my corner office on the 12th floor, analyzing a complicated marine logistics contract. The corporate building where I worked was a sanctuary of polished marble, quiet professionalism, and strict security protocols. My career was the one place where I was valued for my intellect, not my wallet. My father, Gideon, knew this. He knew that professional reputation meant everything to me, and he decided to use it as his next weapon. At 10:15 in the morning, my desk phone rang. It was the front lobby receptionist. Her voice was unusually tense. Blythe, your parents are down here in the main lobby. Your father is raising his voice, claiming there is a severe family emergency and demanding that you come down immediately. I did not panic. Thanks to the threatening text message Delaney had sent me the night before, I was already prepared. I had forwarded the screenshots and photographs of my parents to Thaddeus Palmer, our building security manager. Thaddeus was a retired police officer who ran the corporate lobby with 0 tolerance for drama. Tell them I will be right down, I said. And please notify Thaddeus. I smoothed my blazer, stepped out of my office, and took the elevator down to the ground floor. When the silver doors slid open, the chaotic scene unfolded exactly as I had predicted. Gideon was pacing in front of the reception desk, his face flushed with anger, wearing his work jacket as if to emphasize his blue-collar struggle. Corinne stood slightly behind him, playing the role of the distressed, helpless mother. The lobby was busy. Executives, clients, and colleagues from various departments were walking past, their eyes lingering on the loud man causing a scene. Blythe, Gideon shouted as soon as he saw me. He marched forward, closing the distance. You need to fix this right now. The bank called again this morning. They are coming for the truck. He spoke loudly, making sure his voice bounced off the high ceiling. He wanted an audience. He wanted my colleagues to hear that I was allowing my family to suffer. That is a business problem, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. I stood my ground, refusing to shrink back. It is not an emergency involving me. Corinne stepped forward, clutching her purse, her voice trembling with practiced theatricality. Blythe, please. If the county tax installment fails, we could lose the house. How can you do this to us? How can you let your own parents become homeless over a silly argument at the airport? I reminded her that the next tax deadline was still several weeks away. You have time to reduce your expenses, I said, maintaining my professional tone. You can sell your recreational vehicle, or you can speak with the county to restructure your payments. I am no longer funding your lifestyle. Gideon's eyes widened with fury. You are humiliating us, he roared. You make 6 figures sitting in a fancy office while your family drowns. All I am asking for is 1 truck payment. You came to my workplace, I replied, my gaze cold. You created this public scene. You are humiliating yourself. Thaddeus Palmer materialized beside me, accompanied by another uniformed security officer. Thaddeus stepped between my father and me, his posture broad and unyielding. Sir, you need to lower your voice, Thaddeus said calmly. You are disrupting a place of business. If you cannot speak quietly, I will have to ask you to leave the premises. Gideon scoffed, trying to assert his dominance over the security guard. I will leave when my ungrateful daughter agrees to help her family. Thaddeus did not flinch. This is private property. You are now trespassing. Please step toward the exit. For a brief second, I saw the realization hit my father. The tactic had failed. The corporate environment he thought would force me into submission was actually protecting me. He was not the patriarch here. He was just a disorderly trespasser. Gideon sneered at me, his lip curling in disgust. You are a cold, selfish woman, he spat. Thaddeus and the other officer escorted Gideon and Corinne through the revolving glass doors and out onto the rainy sidewalk. Several of my colleagues from the underwriting department had witnessed the entire exchange. One of them gave me a sympathetic look, clearly understanding the toxic dynamic that had just played out. I nodded a quiet thank you, turned around, and went back to work. By lunchtime, the smear campaign had begun in full force. Gideon, bruised by his public ejection, launched a massive offensive on the family group chat and social media. He twisted the narrative so violently that it barely resembled reality. He told the extended family that they had come to my office simply to drop off a peace offering and beg for forgiveness, but I had maliciously ordered hospital security to throw them out into the rain while they wept. Aunt Muriel posted a passive-aggressive status online about daughters who abandoned their aging parents for corporate greed. Uncle Bram sent me a text calling me a sociopath. Cousins who had not spoken to me in 5 years suddenly felt entitled to lecture me about blood being thicker than water. They were all flying monkeys, entirely manipulated by Gideon's lies. They painted me as the villain who was starving her family to death because of a missed flight. Aunt Vera fought back on my behalf. She replied to several relatives privately, sending them the screenshots of Gideon's walk-home message and Delaney's threat about visiting my office. She showed them that Gideon had planned the airport exclusion and then premeditated the workplace ambush. The family split into factions. Some relatives fell silent, shocked by the undeniable proof of Gideon's cruelty. Others dug their heels in, insisting that the source of the conflict did not matter because family must always share their wealth. I answered none of those arguments. I refused to defend myself one person at a time. I was not going to turn my private trauma into a public trial for people who were committed to misunderstanding me. Let them think what they wanted. But my father was not done. The public humiliation at my office had wounded his pride, and a narcissistic man with a wounded pride is a dangerous thing. He needed to win. He needed to prove to everyone that he was still the ruler of the Calloway family. And 3 weeks later, he laid his final, most elaborate trap. 3 weeks passed. The silence from my immediate family was deafening, but it was the kind of silence that precedes a storm. My father's business was struggling without the extra installation truck, and Mallory was panicking as her tuition deadline loomed closer. They were running out of time, and they needed a grand gesture to force my hand. That gesture arrived in the form of an elegant, gold-embossed invitation mailed directly to my apartment. Gideon had rented a banquet room at an upscale event center in Tacoma to host a replacement birthday dinner for Corinne. The invitation indicated that it would be a large gathering, including extended family, close friends, and several of his business associates. It was an expensive endeavor, likely funded by credit cards he could not afford, designed to project an image of prosperity and unity. I tossed the invitation onto my kitchen counter and ignored it. I had no intention of walking into another ambush. But 2 days later, Aunt Vera called me with disturbing news. "Blythe, you need to know what Gideon is telling people," Vera said, her voice tight with disbelief. "I just spoke to Muriel. Gideon has been calling every single guest on the list. He is telling them that you have finally seen the error of your ways. He said you agreed to attend the dinner, that you are going to stand up and publicly apologize to your mother, and that you have promised to restore all the financial support to heal the family." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. He was fabricating a massive lie. He was setting a stage where my absence would look like a cruel, last-minute betrayal of a grieving mother, or my presence would pressure me into conforming to the script he had written. If I did not show up, he would stand at the head of the banquet table, play the tragic victim, and solidify his narrative forever. My name would be mud in the family and the local business community. Then my phone vibrated. It was a text from Uncle Bram, the same uncle who had called me a sociopath weeks earlier. The message read, "I am proud of you for doing the right thing, Blythe. Fixing what you caused takes maturity. We are all looking forward to your apology speech at the dinner. It is time to heal." I stared at the screen. That message changed my mind instantly. Silence was no longer an option. Silence would become another invented promise. If Gideon wanted to use a banquet hall to corner me, I would use it as a courtroom. I spent the next 3 days preparing. I did not buy a birthday gift. I went to a professional printing shop. I took the digital folder of evidence I had compiled and printed 40 identical copies. I placed each set of documents inside a sleek, black presentation binder. The binders contained everything: the airport texts, the bank statements, the canceled checks, the property tax receipts, the security incident report from my office, and the cease and desist letters I had drafted. When Saturday evening arrived, I wore a tailored black dress and a pair of sharp heels. I looked like a woman going to a high-stakes corporate negotiation, not a family birthday party. Aunt Vera drove us to the event center. She had 2 large tote bags in the trunk, heavy with the 40 binders. We walked through the double doors of the banquet hall. The room was decorated with expensive floral arrangements and soft lighting. There were at least 50 people there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, and even Kendrick Vance, a senior representative of the local Commercial Business Association and one of Gideon's largest clients. Gideon was standing near the entrance, holding a glass of wine, holding court with a group of relatives. When he saw me walk in, his eyes lit up with predatory triumph. He thought he had won. He thought the social pressure of 50 pairs of eyes would force me to play the part of the repentant daughter. He clapped his hands together loudly, demanding the room's attention. The chatter died down. "Here she is," Gideon announced, his voice booming across the hall. He raised his glass toward me. "The daughter who finally came to her senses. Let us welcome Blythe back to the family." A polite, expectant round of applause rippled through the guests. People smiled at me, waiting for the heartwarming moment of reconciliation they had been promised. I did not smile. I did not walk toward him to accept an embrace. I stood firmly in the center of the room, my posture straight, my expression unreadable. Vera stood beside me, setting the heavy tote bags onto a nearby table. I looked around the room, making eye contact with Uncle Bram, Aunt Muriel, and finally, my mother, who was sitting at the guest of honor table, looking nervous. I waited for the applause to fade into absolute silence. Then I spoke. "Before this dinner starts," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the banquet room, "I need to correct a massive fabrication." The smiles on the faces of the guests faltered. Gideon lowered his glass, his expression darkening instantly. "I have not come here to apologize," I continued, my tone even and clinical. "I have not apologized for ending my financial payments, and I have not restored a single one of them. The promises you were told about tonight are entirely invented." A low murmur swept through the room. Muriel gasped, putting a hand to her chest. Gideon took a step toward me, his face twisting with rage. "You came here to ruin another birthday?" He hissed, trying to keep his voice low enough to avoid echoing, but the room was too quiet. "You are making a scene." "I came here because you told 50 people that I made promises I never made," I replied sharply. "You used this event to corner me." Gideon turned toward the guests, attempting damage control. "Do not listen to her. She is deeply unwell. She is choosing greed over her own blood. She abandoned her family." I turned to Vera. "Vera, would you please distribute the files?" Vera unzipped the tote bags and began moving efficiently between the tables, handing a black binder to every family member, every friend, and intentionally placing one directly in front of Kendrick Vance. "What is this?" Uncle Bram asked, opening the cover of the binder. "That is the truth," I said, addressing the entire room. "My father has spent the last month telling you that I suffered an emotional breakdown over a minor ticketing mistake. Please turn to page 1. The sound of 40 thick pages turning in unison was like thunder in the quiet hall. Page 1 is a photograph of the text message my father sent me at the airport, I explained. He deleted my boarding pass 25 minutes before dropping me off at the curb. He wrote, "Beg me, and I might consider rebooking it. Or just walk home." I watched the color drain from Uncle Bram's face. Kendrick Vance frowned deeply, reading the cruel words printed on the page. "Turn to page 2, I commanded. "Those are my banking receipts. I paid for the coastal vacation house. I paid for the rental vehicles. I paid for the tours." Gideon planned to strand me in Seattle as a punishment for refusing to guarantee a disastrous business loan, while fully expecting to fly to California and enjoy a luxury vacation entirely funded by my credit cards. Gideon was frozen. The arrogant patriarch mask had shattered, leaving behind a panicked, sweating man. "Please keep turning the pages," I said, my voice relentless. "You will find 4 years of ledgers. You will find that I have paid the property taxes on my parents' home. I have paid the monthly installments on Gideon's commercial work truck. I have paid Mallory's college tuition. I have funded Delaney's business ventures. I am not a greedy, absent daughter. I was the silent bank that kept this family afloat. And the moment I refused one high-risk loan, I was discarded at an airport like trash." The room was dead silent. The evidence was irrefutable. It was not a matter of opinion or emotion. It was black ink on white paper, backed by bank routing numbers and timestamps. Corinne suddenly stood up from her chair. She was shaking, her face streaked with tears of rage and embarrassment. The pressure of the room staring at her was too much to bear. "You always do this," Corinne shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me, entirely losing her composure. "You always have to be the smartest person in the room. You always throw your money in our faces." "I did not throw anything, Mom," I said quietly. "I just stopped paying. I just wanted you to feel dependent on us for once." Corinne screamed, her voice cracking hysterically. The words tore out of her throat before she could stop them. "You walk around acting like you never need anybody. You never ask us for anything. I just wanted you to know what it feels like to be terrified of losing your family." The collective gasp from the guests was audible. Corinne had just confessed. In front of 50 people, in front of the extended family, who had defended her, she admitted the dark, toxic truth. It was never about a joke. It was never a mistake. It was a calculated psychological attack meant to break my independence and force me into subservience. Kendrick Vance slowly closed his binder. He looked at Gideon with an expression of pure disgust. "An honorable businessman does not extort his own children," Kendrick muttered, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. He stood up, grabbed his coat, and walked out of the banquet hall without another word. Gideon watched his most important client walk out the door. The financial ruin he had been trying to stave off had just been cemented. He turned back to me, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and terror. "You have destroyed me. You destroyed yourself," I corrected him. I walked over to where he stood and handed him a final, separate white envelope. "This is a formal cease and desist notice," I said. "It bars you, Corinne, Mallory, and Delaney from contacting my employer, visiting my apartment, or attempting to access my financial accounts. Any further harassment will be met with immediate legal action." Gideon stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "Then you are no longer my daughter," he spat, his voice trembling. I smiled. A genuine, unburdened smile. "You used that exact threat at the airport. It does not carry power anymore. You have nothing left to take from me." I turned around and walked down the center aisle of the banquet hall. Vera followed me, her head held high. Behind us, the room exploded into chaos. Relatives were shouting at Gideon. Uncle Bram was demanding an explanation. Corinne was sobbing uncontrollably. The grand reconciliation dinner had transformed into a tribunal of their own making. We walked out into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage behind. The fallout from the banquet hall disaster was swift and merciless. By exposing the truth with undeniable physical evidence, I had stripped Gideon and Corinne of their most valuable asset, their narrative. The extended family, finally understanding the depth of the manipulation, distanced themselves. Aunt Muriel sent me a long, groveling apology email, claiming she had been brainwashed. I read it, deleted it, and did not reply. Without my invisible financial safety net, the reality of my family's actual income hit them with the force of a freight train. Gideon's company, Callaway Signs and Structures, shrank drastically. Without the heavy-duty installation truck that I had funded, he could not accept large-scale or distant contracts. He was forced to rent equipment on a day-by-day basis, which devoured his profit margins. Word of his behavior at the banquet hall spread through the local business community via Kendrick Vance. Contractors realized that a man who would financially abuse and publicly lie about his own daughter could not be trusted with commercial partnerships. He had to lay off his seasonal workers and abandon his dreams of expansion. He became a small, bitter man operating a failing local service. Corinne lost the comfortable, subsidized lifestyle she felt entitled to. The property tax bills and the everyday expenses began drowning them. She had to swallow her pride, ask her clinic for extra shifts, and start working 6 days a week just to keep the lights on. They were forced to sell their recreational trailer and cancel their planned kitchen renovations. Her social media accounts, once filled with boasts about her perfect family, went entirely silent. The golden children were violently shoved into adulthood. Mallory lost her tuition funding. She scrambled, missed the registration deadline for her clinicals, and her graduation was delayed by a full semester. She had to take out federal student loans, carrying the debt she had always assumed I would absorb. To pay her daily living expenses, she had to take a grueling job working night shifts at a local rehabilitation center. She learned what it meant to be exhausted, to work for a paycheck, and to realize that tears do not pay the rent. Delaney's fantasy of a fully funded outdoor bicycle repair empire vanished. The supplier sold the van and the specialized tools to someone else. Delaney, having burned her bridge with me, had no capital. She was forced to keep her retail job at the sporting goods store. A year later, I heard through Vera that Delaney had bought a cheap, rusted cargo trailer and was fixing bicycles at local weekend markets using basic hand tools. It was a fraction of the business she wanted, but for the first time in her life, it was funded by her own sweat. For months passed in blissful, uninterrupted peace. I threw myself into my work, earned a promotion, and spent my weekends exploring the Pacific Northwest with Vera. Then, one cold Tuesday evening in November, the intercom in my apartment buzzed. I walked over to the panel and pressed the camera button. The grainy black and white video feed showed Gideon standing on the public sidewalk outside the secure lobby doors. He looked older. His shoulders were slumped, his coat looked worn, and the arrogant fire that used to burn in his eyes was entirely extinguished. I pressed the audio button, keeping the door locked. "Yes?" Blythe, Gideon's voice crackled through the cheap speaker. It sounded hollow. "Please let me up. The family has suffered enough. We need to talk." He did not apologize. Notice his choice of words. The family has suffered enough. He was framing the natural consequences of his own financial incompetence as a punishment that I was maliciously imposing on them. He still viewed me as the gatekeeper to their comfort. "I am not letting you up," I said clearly. "What do you want?" "I want to invite you to Sunday dinner," he said, his voice rising in slight desperation. Your mother misses you. We can put this all behind us. I stared at the screen. He was still trying to negotiate a return to the status quo without acknowledging the betrayal. I have one question for you, Gideon, I said, leaning closer to the microphone. Knowing what it cost you, knowing the loss of the truck, the loss of the respect, the loss of your business reputation, would you cancel my flight ticket again? Silence hung on the intercom for a long time. I could see him shifting his weight on the sidewalk. I would handle it differently, he finally mumbled. That is not what I asked, I replied. You cannot even admit that the act itself was abusive. You only regret that your plan failed and cost you money. You are going to regret having nobody when you need help. He suddenly snapped, a flash of his old temper returning. You cannot survive alone. Needing support is very different from accepting disrespect, I said softly. Do not return to this building. I took my finger off the button, cutting the audio connection. I watched on the screen as Thaddeus Palmer, who had been alerted by the front desk, approached my father on the sidewalk. Gideon raised his hands in defeat, turned around, and walked away into the dark city rain. That was the last time I ever spoke to him. The next morning, I took a half-day off work and visited my attorney. I legally changed my emergency contact information, removing Corinne and replacing her with Vera. I updated my medical directives and my estate documents. I drafted a final, legally binding notice severing all informal family authorizations. If I were to ever end up in a hospital, my parents and sisters would have absolutely no right to make decisions for me, nor would they inherit a single dime of the wealth I had built. I sent them one final email to the administrative address I had created solely for paperwork. I stated clearly that the personal relationship was permanently terminated. I did not demand repayment for the $68,000. I considered it the most expensive, but most valuable, tuition I had ever paid to learn the truth about my family. Months later, when the Seattle winter finally broke into spring, I packed a single suitcase. I drove to the airport, walked up to the airline kiosk, and printed my boarding pass. I took the trip to the California coast. Alone. I did not book the massive, $6,000 oceanfront mansion. I booked a small, beautiful boutique hotel right on the water in Monterey. I rented a convertible. I drove down the Pacific Coast Highway with the wind in my hair, listening to music, stopping wherever I wanted. I took the sunset sailing excursion that I had originally planned for my mother, sitting on the deck of the catamaran with a glass of crisp white wine, watching the sun dip below the horizon and paint the ocean in shades of gold and violent purple. The memory of standing at the SeaTac airport, staring at the red error screen, returned to me. But it no longer carried the sharp sting of rejection. It carried the warmth of liberation. The most important consequence of this entire ordeal was never about the ruined vacation, the canceled cars, or even the money. It was about realizing my own worth. For 34 years, my family believed that my place among them depended entirely on what I could pay for. They viewed my love as a transaction and my boundaries as an insult. They wanted a golden goose, but they wanted to keep it in a cage of fear and guilt so it would never realize it could fly. By withdrawing from that arrangement, I lost the role they had assigned to me as the invisible, unappreciated bank. But in doing so, I recovered absolute control over my own life. My father thought that canceling one airline ticket would remind me that I desperately needed my family to survive. Instead, his cruel little prank showed me exactly how desperately they needed me and how little they actually cared about the daughter writing the checks. I never restored the payments. I never returned to Sunday dinner. I threw Mallory's graduation announcement in the trash without opening it. I never answered another pathetic request disguised as nostalgia. They told me to walk home. So I did. I just chose to build a home where none of them possessed a key. Now it is your turn to be the juror. If you were in my shoes, looking at the man who financially abused you standing out in the cold rain, would you have given him a chance to reconcile? Or do you agree that permanently closing the door was the only way to survive? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this story. If you found it satisfying to see toxic entitlement get exactly what it deserves, Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on the next dramatic family story. See you in the next video.